So the next session is going to be SIG 3. We'll talk about the progress that they have made, and they also bring up like a couple of items around release 1. And with that, I will hand over to Stephen and Tina. And Stephen and Tina, please take over from here. I think it should work. Yep. Go ahead.
Hello. Oh, it does work. All right, so this is the SIG Release burst of feather session. So SIG Release, or SIG 3, is responsible for mostly release management process, CI/CD, any external dependencies management, any tests, tool setup, frameworks, making sure that the release meets a certain standards. And moving forward, we also build tools to make developers' life easier. So that's where the SDK and things would fall into. And then the certification testing. So for the release process and management, actually, Bala, which is just coming in, has nice enough to have written the development process and project management doc, which is linked here. I do understand that if I convert that into PDF, you're not going to be able to see the link. So I'll probably write out the link before making the PDF. So it's basically just following Kubernetes. It's nothing really amazing. I'm not saying what Bala did is not amazing. I'm just saying what we as a community is converging on is basically just kind of copying Kubernetes. So we have contributors guideline, which is basically like big git resource, CLI signings and pull requests and branch strategies, which is on that guideline. And that guideline is basically just a link to Kubernetes contributor guideline. We have enhancement proposal processes, which is also Kubernetes, exactly that. So every time you have a feature that you want to propose the features. And if the SIG chairs approve it, it goes into part of the release. And then we can pull that out at any given moment too. Release process is, we work backwards from our projected dates of release. And then we want to see a single windows of, say, 10, 16, 20 weeks. What's the days of freezing the features? When are we going to pull the release branch? Do we designate a bug fixing cycle so we have no new features coming in, and then we will co-freeze before releases? And yes, we can always remove items from the feature list. Probably will happen very often. And then the tracking of issues is just GitHub issues. So again, exactly like Kubernetes. So we don't need to pull any outside tools to do issues tracking. We basically just use GitHub issues. You can see a project board using Kanban. And then it tracks milestones. There's a triage process. It's also linked here. Committers. So far, the community, the project, the GitHub, the GitHub project, so it's Nephio project, has 2 committers, John and me. So we do expect throughout the first release, different SIG chairs are going to elevate people up to become committers. So contribute, you'll be committers by the end, or in the middle. We should have a process to elevate committers, but then usually it's just co-review and contribute. CI/CD. So before anything else, this is probably the highest priority things for us, because obviously right after the POC, we are probably ready to get code into things for real. The process is still write a feature design doc and things to be approved. But then at the end, there should be code coming in pretty soon. So we have to have CI/CD, which is not there yet today. And for the many SIG 3 meetings we've had before today, the community, people who attended the meeting, has already converged on using Prowl. Again, we're copying Kubernetes. Against nothing special. And then Prowl itself is basically a Kubernetes application. So it runs a bunch of pods on Kubernetes. So the Kubernetes one right now runs on GKE. So there's no reason why we wouldn't. So I'm pretty sure until April, Google will be happy to fund a GKE cluster to run Prowl. And then, actually all the jobs runs directly on Kubernetes clusters. What happened inside is they will create a kind clusters, and then they will run so there are 3 jobs in Kubernetes: pre-submits, post-submits, and periodics. So we'll again pretty much do the same thing. Same thing for Tide. Tide is a cool feature which brings all the PLs, the pull request, that meets the pretty much common criteria and put them into a batch. So making sure that you don't put things in asynchronous order, in which case you have temporary branch breakage. So we will use Proud. So using Proud, one of the interesting thing of a life cycle, a day of a life of a of a commit into Proud in Kubernetes looks like this, which I don't think anyone can read.
But you can go to Zoom.
In the middle of this, I'm not sure if I can zoom this. Try. Oh, I can. Yeah. So you can put a pull request. So the hook will actually send the approvers emails, and then when you say it looks good to me, it jumps over to a bunch of plugins. At the very least, we have to have the CLA plugins to talk to the Linux Foundation CLA server. And then we will run the Proud jobs. So pre-submit tests would be basically picking up all your unit tests. It creates kind, and then it will run through the API servers to make sure that it actually passes before it goes. So the point is, again, we probably leverage all the plugins. I don't see any reasons why we would actually skip any of the plugins. You may be able to write our own plugins, but then I think for now, probably not. Oh, look at this. Branch strategy. So we have a lot of branches right now. Not a lot of branches. A lot of repos right now in Nephio project. Actually, John by himself created a lot of them for that one single PLC. So we'll either merge this or just let it sit. But then right now we have Nephio-PLCs that has all the PLCs. The workshop things that we just did, most of the controller codes are on PLCs, except maybe some of them are actually on Nokia repos. And then we have the scripts that are actually sitting into this particular Summit repo. But we have one Nephio repo that was meant to be a Nephio official repo, but it's empty right now. The Nephio repo probably will likely, so here's the thing. Community has asked and advocated that we are creating new repos. I keep on using branches instead of repos. I don't know why I wrote this. I wrote this morning, so sorry. So creating new repos for every different components. At the very least, maybe in a controller should have their own repo. Particularly if a controller addresses more than some of the Nephio use cases, but it parks in Nephio anyway, then it could be used across the board or by itself. Yeah.
So one of the bugs.
One of the bugs.
If we do that, I'm okay with that, different repos for the different components, but one of the bugs, thank you, Wim and I spent a little longer on than we needed to last night was because the way Go works is, when you're in a separate repo or your separate Go mod, it pins I guess even that was, when they're not all built in the same, as part of the same repo, but they're built as separate Go modules, it pins the versions, which means that we spent 30 minutes or an hour, half an hour trying to figure out a bug until we realized, oh, this has already been fixed in an older version of the library. That it's just that because we're pinned, so we had to. So my point is just that.
Do they pin the latest? Or
it always pins. No, yeah. Whenever you do a Go mod tidy or whatever, it pins the version of the release, and then it stays that until you do an update.
Oh, okay.
And so.
Because go.mod is a fixed file when you
right.
That. So right after that, you have to physically change it.
So.
The problem is that they pitch to a version, even if you try to update it, and it didn't update.
Yeah, no, it won't. You have to update your go.mod.
Yeah, it was.
Even with an update, it didn't do it.
Even when we did go get update, it didn't do it. We had to muck with the Go mod file ourselves.
So go mod tidy and stuff didn't.
Yeah, it didn't fix it.
Yeah.
So.
Because we had latest, so we didn't have tags. So the way we resolved it is, we actually add a tag, which we knew, okay, we are going to get this explicitly, and that worked.
Right. So we
The-
pin the
the-
version, and then we would see it later if we. But my point is this: I think that's fine, but we probably need some tooling, and maybe we can talk to some folks in Kubernetes. Maybe they have some tooling like this already. But we might want some tooling that's automatically going and identifying when dependencies have updated, and because you can run down a long train of before you realize that some module in your 300 imports, is an old version. Just that's all. That was my main point. I want to make sure we put in some tooling to help defend against
Interesting
that.
that they don't pick up the latest. Anyway, so okay. But anyway, so they ask. So one of my big questions there is, if you do want to be able to create repos, I am not aware that you can do that on pull request, obviously. I'm not aware that there's any like constructs in Git that allows you to do that if you don't have writable rights. Go ahead.
So in Kubernetes, they have a tool called Peribolus, where you can manage the GitHub users as well as the repositories in a YAML file, and then you put it into Prow again, and
And then what, Prow creates a repo for you?
yeah, Prow calls Peribolus, and then it updates your whole GitHub organization.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's a good thing.
You can submit a ticket.
Yeah, please like post that into like our Slack. Okay. Because if that can be automated instead of like asking John and me to like click and create it for you, that would be fine. That would be great.
Usually, if you create the repo at the root, you have to submit a ticket, and then we'll give you the right to update the YAML file. Then you can.
Yeah, but this
create
case
it.
we're creating a new repo.
Yeah,
off of
yeah.
the-
This is a root. Yeah.
Okay.
That's a.
Cool. Test setups, unit tests. Obviously, so let's make that clear. That there's no tests. If you have no unit tests, it would not be part of Nephio Release. And then the unit test will be added as part of the pre-submit test. So it would test against all the commits. In the future, maybe we'll make it like groups, so we'll run through all the tests. If they're not related, maybe we can save some CPU. But for now, obviously, no discrimination. Just run all the tests on a pre-submit. And it runs on a client cluster, as we said earlier. But then that's only unit test. So what do we do with integration tests, functional tests, release tests, and scalability tests?
I think
Go
you
ahead.
need coverage probably, right? So it's not just a single unit
Well,
test.
unit test is the basic thing that will definitely run as part of
No,
what is
sure,
being
but I
executed.
mean, if I do one test, you probably don't approve. I think there should be some coverage, not? Coverage of the code, right?
No, I mean, we obviously have to run test coverage tools to
That's
static
what I'm saying,
analyses
like
of
it's
that.
not purely unit test.
Yeah,
It
but
should-
then you have to write unit tests for me to approve in the first
Oh,
place.
there is tools
So
that
it's
give
easy
you
for
that.
me to reject your code if you don't have
Yeah,
unit
but there
tests.
is tools that part of the make file. You basically put it in, and then you basically get the information directly.
Yeah, we can help with some of that. So you can call OEM Kubernetes.
Okay,
And
Okay.
also security good. There's GrowSec.
okay. So for the other tests like scalability, integration, functional released, the nice thing is the test setup that we just had this morning on the workshop, it was very inspirational. Thanks for all the people involved. I can name them: Vish, Bala, Joel, Sandeep, and
Dash.
Victor. Sorry. And thank you for doing that. And then let's put it in good use. We can use that as our sandbox. And in fact, all the tests that we talked about, we can just run it against this. And the nice thing is on this test, we contain within a VM. Well, you still have to create a repository that isn't part of the VM. It's actually outside of it. But still, that's okay. We can create them because our test is much more confined. It's not 140 instances. So we can create this, have it access, and we can run against it. The nice thing is it has the networking. So Sandeep was able to make it work such that SMF and UPF, we were able to see the PFCP packets going through the links. So we can even get to a point where we're saying that the networking aspects of that is actually being realized. The configuration is obviously correct for them to actually start sending the PFCP packets. And then we can sandbox the whole thing, including the management cluster, whatever topology we will use as we evolve, as a community, and run individual tests over there across different clusters, all contained within a VM. These are all kind clusters for those, because John didn't actually describe the test setup, I guess, this morning as much. So kind clusters, every node is a Docker container. So you can just use Docker networking underneath to hook them up. Victor did a WAN simulator, so we're able to see whether or not they're actually not only going through a bridge, but then they could be in a different subnet. And that's pretty useful. So moving forward, definitely we'll get very good use of that. And then I ping all the people I just mentioned, saying that it will be long-term, continue maintaining, obviously, and continuously enhancing the tools for us to be used. A little more on that, too, is the multi-thing, of course. So in that case, we can then create. So in the future, we may even have BGP support somewhere. Then we can get away with the whole gateway problems on there. But then now, when you're creating them, the basic topology is the UPF for FreeFiGC has 3 secondary interfaces. SMF1 has 1. And in that case, the N4 talk to each other. So again, we can make them talk to, they are talking to each other, and then we can actually use that as a test, even for interdependencies between network functions. So for V1, the scope keeps on changing, so I don't know whether or not that's actually valid. For a while back, we were saying that one of the things that we want to do is to actually automate the setup of the entire 5G core, AMF, SMF, and UPFs. And that should be enough for you to make a 5G call using UE ransom. If we can do that, that would be great as a ultimate functional test to make sure that all the networkings, all the configurations are correct, so a 5G call would actually get through. So this doesn't exist today. And I haven't modeled anything for AMF, neither model community. And then I think SMF may need our NRF to run. So all this thing can be just dumped into some sort of core clusters. They all communicate with each other using SBI, the service bus. So they're just HTTP. They don't need secondary interfaces. They're just Kubernetes interface. They can talk to each other. So this should be simple to deploy. We may not have to model all the other components outside AMF. We can basically just use it as a deployment, generate the deployment, and just push it, the whole shift left model. And a couple of things is there were community, Dimitrios and Alok were talking about using eNode. And then if the bridge network becomes OVS, that's possible. We don't know. So, but that's more like a SIG2, SIG3 cross, and see whether or not we have a test set up to validate that project. But the potential is quite big, so I'm pretty excited to take this, and it becomes a cornerstone of our testing. For those who actually have been attending the SIG3 meetings, we have also asked RF Edge to share some test beds with us. And I personally log in and play around with it. Sometimes it took a very long time to just get the test bed. That one time I tried a demo to the folks, it took me the whole day to finally get the reservations, and it was kind of expired.
Yeah, then the tip is if you have any important to show, you have to tell Lincoln in advance, asking don't tear down anything till you use it. Yeah.
Probably. So this is needed if we have any hardware dependencies. So for example, if we ever get adventurous enough to put FreeFiGC onto SRIOV, then you definitely need an actual hardware to support this. And so these testbeds are physically designed in UNH and maintained by UNH, so I didn't use the right adverb. And then you can click on the links to check it out. They are a mix of ARM and x86. Some of them have GPUs. So it's very future-proof. And then if we want to use it long-term, but then the hope here is after April, if Nephio still excites your company, and then you contribute to the membership, then we should own our own testbeds moving forward. Or if you as a community member has testbed that wants to donate and be accessible by the community, we should actually loop that in. External dependencies, actually quite a lot. Obviously, we depend on Kubernetes. We depend on CAP and Porch. We depend on config sync. For our tests, we depend on 3.5GC, kind, and a bunch of selected CNIs. So for release, we need to test against those upstream projects and make sure that everything still works when we release it. So this is SIG3 has to have a system in place to make sure that we can cross-check all the different versions that we want to support. I mean, let's not romanticize this whole thing. So for release 1, it's going to be one version of each of this. We're not going to be supporting a bunch of different versions of Kubernetes or anything. But moving forward, we may. And if it is, then we have to test against this before we release, making sure that we release documents what set of versions we support for each of this, because those are upstream projects that we don't own on Nephio. I proposed that about a month ago, I think, in the SIG3 meetings, that for the custom resource definitions that are published by Nephio, we should have, well, so I said that even during June Summit. The published CLDs needs to be backed by an open source implementations. We don't want random CLDs to be proposed, and then it never worked anywhere. So, or if it only works for your vendors NFs, that's also not good. So we need to be backed by open source implementations. An example of that is the demo that you saw this morning. I mean, we work with a lot of network function vendors, and then we do know for a fact that UPF, SMF, almost all of them has BGP support. But then that doesn't exist in 3.5GC. So the CLD should contain BGP configurations, but it doesn't today because it's not backed by any open source implementation that I can give you. But then we do want that, and then we probably back it up by some Bird or Quagga type thing moving forward. So anyone interested, they can do that. This is a SIG2 thing, but then that's one example. And then we would like to establish a CLD watchdog group within the community that will be vetting the CLDs that we propose, understanding that not all of us are hardcore Kubernetes guys. So some of us may be proposing some CLDs that are not very Kubernetes standards or friendly. So, for example, I wrote the CLDs and then John changed a lot of them because it's not Kubernetes standard. So that does happen, and then don't feel bad. It will continue to happen moving forward. But we do want people to propose CLDs, of course, and then don't get deterred by this. It's just more like a safeguard for us, so that we don't have some random CLDs coming in.
By the way, in Kubernetes, there's 4 people in the world that can approve APIs. I'm not one of them. I said in Kubernetes, there's 4 people in the world that can approve APIs, and I'm not one of them. But everybody's APIs get reviewed by those people and get modified and tweaked to manage. There's a lot of API conventions, and there's a lot of design principles that are not easy to all keep in your head.
Right.
And even those people don't always agree.
Yeah, Rob Scott, we talked to him about the gateway APIs that was being vetted endlessly and killing. Even the operator design and everything is being vetted so badly. Yeah, so CLDs are hard to get right, but we'll try.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I guess you have some resources for us to look at to see how to do it right.
At Google, we can send it to some internal groups to take a look, for sure.
Yeah.
I guess you have tutorials and stuff on how to.
Tutorials.
So this is actually a really good point. So there are there are paltry resources to help people develop these things well. I've been trying to drum up the right people to write some more things about that from within Google. There's also people at Red Hat that could do that. There's people at a few other places that could do that. I'm trying to facilitate generating that material, but we do not have very good material right now. What we have right now is the Kubernetes API conventions on the Kubernetes GitHub, which is like, it's like reading a spec, right? It's not well organized. Somebody's going to get mad at me. I don't think so. But it's just a list of rules, right? And yes, it describes why the rules are usually, which is good, but it's a lot to keep in your head, and it doesn't necessarily get into sort of the design principles behind something like Gateway API, which Stephen mentioned. Gateway API is basically one network function, right? So it's got a lot of the same principles, and you've got different, for example, actors. One of the things we want to do with our API design is say the platform engineer is going to define a certain set of things, which we call a class, which is static, and then a consumer of that, like an application that needs a load balancer, is going to consume that class and instantiate it, but they don't have access to create or modify the classes. So there's different, you structure the resources partly based on the RBAC considerations of who's going to be creating the things, the sort of separation of concerns around that. So all of those are pretty deep topics. So I'm trying to get together some educational materials. I've been thinking about this for 6 months at least and have made almost no progress on it. I apologize. Other things have gotten ahead of me, but it's definitely a huge need for that.
Maybe it's something that can be built as we go.
I think it can be built as we go, but it's sort of like one of these things where I had Rob, who's one of the people who designed the Gateway API, talk to the team, Stephen's team, because I didn't want them to repeat the same mistakes. They spent like 2.5, 3 years building the Gateway API. This wasn't like a 2-month effort. They made a lot of mistakes and they learned a lot, and we would like to leverage those, right?
Yeah.
So similarly, I do want to get some materials out there so that we don't all just waste our time.
I mean, I remodeled the UPF API based on the class structure that was being presented to me on the gateway side.
Yeah, so just a thought.
So it also fits our model of separation of concerns. So there's a network architect, a deployment engineers, and then basically vendors that will have to conform to this one.
Right. So just a thought that, as we all know, much of these network data models are represented in Yang, right? To start with, right? And so just wanted to see if there is a precedence in terms of looking at some of those data models like in Yang, and coming up with an associated CRDs, right? Some definitions, right? So
in fact, this is inspired by Vim. So I was saying that we would like to build tools to convert an existing Yang model.
Right.
Vim.
When I talked about the Yang auto generator, right? There's a few challenges. So what I did basically, I took the Yang file as is and mapped it one-on-one to Kubernetes. And the reason for it is if you start to manipulate, you will have challenges in the underlying support, right? So, but what I think the CRDs I'm referring to, so I think we should have the vendor one-on-one mapping of the Yang into Kubernetes. And then you basically build an operator on top of it that consumes it, right? So I look at the idea of, let's say, the UPF deployment we have right now, which is basically a generic model that in theory should then translate into the specific Yang implementations of a specific vendor. So because if you start remapping things from that world, we end up with a huge effort, I think, doing that remapping. So I think it's better to say we define a generic CRD that is Nephio, let's say, the Nephio principle, and then a vendor can map it either with an operator or with a function to the specific implementation.
Exactly. So I think this is one of the things that I was also thinking, that if CRDs basically go till the operator, and that operator essentially goes to the whatever the vendor-specific implementation might be, right?
Yeah. Because, for example, I mean, I can talk to you half a day on how from Yang to CRD, because we did. The first attempt for me was I cut it in pieces.
Right.
The problem is, what is the right cut, and will it stay the right cut, right? And the answer to that, in my view, is no, because there will be more functionality of the Yang file. So if you cut it somewhere, it will always be okay today, but tomorrow it will change. So we ended up, I ended up saying, okay, it's the full Yang model is a single CRD, right? And then there is some other challenges because there is limitations in the size.
Right.
So there is a 2 meg limit in etcd by default, which you have to deal with. But so all of that was resolved. So but I think we should, let's not try to remap Yang to CRD, I think. But what I think is relevant, there are some service models, for example, let's say on networking, there's L2SM and L3SM in IETF, for example, that basically say, if you want to do networking layer 2 or layer 3 and stuff like that, they have defined a model. I think that makes sense to then see how we can map that to a CRD, but not the vendor-specific Yang implementation.
No, I completely agree. You know, I think we talked about BGP also, you know, and then exactly, it's in that space that we can talk about. Okay.
Yeah,
Thanks.
that's why we need to carefully maintain the generic CRD. We have gone through all the Yang models, like the common one, the vendor-specific one. We have a lot of lessons already learned, experience we can apply to here.
Okay.
So the Linux Foundation has asked us to take a break to take a picture, a group photo.
Oh.
So
Yes, we have the
pause
photographer
for
here.
2 or
Sorry to
3
interrupt.
minutes.
Sorry. Yeah, hold that thought. We will come back and we can discuss this for an hour. But sorry, we have to make use of the photographer right now. Please go out front. We're going to take a photo just out front, just outside the room here. Line up in the hallway and we'll take a photo. Thank you.